Thank you so much. I'm sure you're getting sick of hearing from me, and I promise you, basically after this, I'm probably going to sit down until the end and you'll get to hear from some of our other amazing speakers. The mindset report is something that was, an idea maybe 12 or so months ago with our team, who, as you would imagine, spent a lot of time speaking to small business owners, obviously to yourselves, to stakeholders, chambers, industry bodies, and the like, and internally to state government as well as federal government. And what we would always come up against is when you speak to small businesses, you have a certain concept of what they need. And a little bit like the presentation we saw earlier, we made lots of assumptions about what that looked like. And we really wanted to drill down into whether our assumptions were real. And if you will, this is probably the first iteration in our own version of looking at behavioural change and looking at how do we influence all levels of government and everyone dealing with small business just to get cut through more than probably what we all have been getting in the past. No doubt we are all very familiar with the fact that there are these, incredible statistics that you've already heard me quote today. So the 482,000, the $117 billion, the 42% in private enterprise employment, all of those things are really important when we think about our small businesses. But as I've already said, they're not just those numbers. And I guess when we look at what's happening with our small business owners at this particular time, I like to go to the national figures on this. So there are 2.5 million small businesses in Australia. 62% of them are sole traders. 43% are not profitable. 75% make less than the average wage. Under 35% of them are owned by women, and less than 8% of them are under the age of 30. That paints a really interesting picture when you start to drill down into who are our small business owners, who is operating them. And we know that the majority of them are actually operated by men over the age of 50. And when we characterize that with how many of our young people are coming into business, it paints a really interesting picture, especially when you're in communities that will tell you about access to finance, about the lack of succession planning, about the fact that maybe it feels a bit hard to look at their balance sheet, amongst other things. So we decided to embark on this journey of research with Central Queensland University to look at how do we unpack some of our assumptions, how do we unpack some of those figures, and how do we find a way to them? How do we get to them? What are we going to do differently that is going to connect with all of these people across Queensland? 482,000 of them. I mean, they're extraordinary numbers. And it is about how do we get to them and how do we make and help them make meaningful change, and especially for the better. So, where am I up to? About the project. So as I said, we partnered with Central Queensland University, and I have to say that this report, and there is probably a hard copy of a very big report. If you don't have it on your table, you can access online. It's about 65 pages. We have given you all a copy of the snapshot and probably sent it out to you, so I'd encourage you to read it. But this report really is absolutely a testament to the hard work of our team, and in particular Luke, who I'm sure you all haven't missed, Rebecca in our team, Kayla, all of them have worked incredibly hard with Central Queensland University to make this happen. And what that actually looked like was looking at all of the international analysis that is happening elsewhere, looking at everything that's available when it comes to small businesses, and seeing what information, what research has been done. And what we quickly learned is that a report like this hasn't occurred in approximately 2 decades. So people aren't looking at small businesses. They're looking at micro businesses, they might be looking at big businesses, or they're looking at HR teams. They're not looking at the life cycle of small business owners in particular. And we wanted to drill down on that. Now, part of this report meant that we were able to interview 331 businesses across Queensland, and then also to interview in depth and to test our assumptions on 20 of those businesses, because we wanted to make sure we were getting it right. So it wasn't just about consultation, it was about challenging that thinking and challenging our own thinking, despite the fact that we think we spend a lot of time with small business. And that's how this research was born. So what did we learn from some of this research? Well, we learned that the research is about leveraging small business strengths and unlocking the opportunities associated with it. We also learned that most people are focused on larger businesses and implementing strategies that work in large businesses on small businesses, and that often doesn't work. We learned that there are lots of different business cycle studies, and usually that includes up to 11 stages in a business life cycle, which is not always very helpful if you're on the ground trying to work with them, particularly when they're small. And with small businesses, it's not necessarily accurate that they have 11 stages. We also looked across the life cycle, and there were three consistent stages that looked like initiation, so when they begin, maturity, and then when they exit. And then we also understood that it was imperative to understand this life cycle in order to leverage some of those strengths and some of those opportunities, which I've already talked about. But what do we learn about mindset? We learned that businesses with more resources, and this is probably not a surprise to anyone in the room, is likely to thrive. We also learned that non-employing businesses take longer to stabilise in the life cycle. So it is sometimes a mistake for them to think that they shouldn't scale or that they shouldn't take the leap to become bigger. We learned that businesses with access to trusted networks, like the ones in this room, or a growth mindset, were more resilient. They were able to pivot quicker. They were able to sustain economic uncertainty because they would reach out to their networks. And we also learned that the places that our small businesses are getting their information is not from government, surprise, surprise, but from the people that they trust. Their family, their friends, their trusted networks. It might be their chamber, but if they're not part of the chamber, where else are they going? It is those people that they surround themselves with. And newer businesses often tend to take more risks, but become more conservative as they age. So when we talk about this concept of innovators and risk takers, ordinarily, it is our young fledgling businesses. Some would call them micro businesses, some would call them, our startups, but really that's where the risk taking begins. But as they proceed, as they move along this journey, all of that begins to shift. So what did we learn about the Queensland small businesses? Well, they were quite interesting findings, but achieving stability is absolutely a key driver for our small business owners across our state. Most small business owners identified their businesses as being stable because that is something that they sought to achieve. Small businesses in a stabilisation or exit stage had fewer employees. So they were stable because they could control their environment, because they control the numbers, and if they were planning to exit, then they would shrink. Exit is also seen as much as a function of success as it is as failure. And I think you can really see that in some of the supports out there and certainly some of the strategies around what are we providing our small businesses. There are very few programs, government websites, or even training initiatives that talk about succession planning when it comes to small business owners. They are not necessarily planning for that retirement or for the success of exiting and handing the baton on to someone else. Owners of small businesses are emotionally invested and feel a sense of inescapability and described a workload as intense. And I would say that is probably why we've seen such great success with the small business financial counsellors and the wellness coaches, because that pressure that is on our small business owners is absolutely palpable. It is there, it is real, and it is regular. It doesn't end because that's the thing. It's all on them, right? So at 9 o'clock at night, they're doing their tax, they're being the marketing person, they're being the HR person. They are doing all of the things to either keep their employees in jobs or to keep the roof over their head because the buck stops with them. So we know that the pressure is absolutely real. Owners are often so busy working in their business, they have no time to work on their business. Now, we all in this room working with small businesses know that's the case. We know that we almost sometimes have to push our foot in the door and say, hi, we're here to help. Yes, it's free. You can say that a number of times, they still don't want to engage with you. It is all about how do we get them to engage? And a lot of the time it's because that pressure, that inescapable pressure of them just continuing to do is very real. Owners see small business as cyclical, oscillating between stages of positive and negative growth and stability. And we've all heard those long-term family-owned businesses say, I've seen this before. It's been hard before. Or this is what I did last time. Or I remember when there was a drought and this is what we did then. They oscillate between I'm going to grow, and then I'm going to stabilize, and then I'm going to grow and stabilize. It's a little bit like a heartbeat. And when it comes to communities, we know that they are absolutely the heartbeat. So small business owners have identified in this study what their priorities are. And their priorities really are that it is absolutely their customers. At all times, they are focused on who are their customers and what do their customers need. They also look to their competitors. They can often tell you who is the guy down the street that's doing something they think they're not allowed to do, who is doing something differently, what does the pricing look like? And I'm sure you've all had those conversations. And then it sort of comes off. We talk about them being innovators, but actually they're not that enthusiastic about innovation. And the reason for that is they view it as potentially destabilizing. They want to see consistency. They want to know what to plan for. And they are hesitant to put something in their business that may or may not upset the apple cart. So there is a little bit of hesitancy there when it comes to that innovation concept. They have a low appetite for risk taking because they, even if there is a prospect of high return, because again, it is really about how do I maintain a stable and consistent small business, because that is what is going to give me, the benefits for all the reasons you get into small business. Being able to set your own timetable, being able to relax because you're not the front man all the time, being able to think about other things other than just working. It is about how do I ensure that we are in a stable state that I can predict what is going to happen next. And then, of course, right down the end of the list is that they are just really mildly proactive. They're really unlikely to put their hand up and say, I need help. They're absolutely unlikely to proactively come to you and say, what have you got available? That's not the case for all, but you'll see when we look at what do those mindsets look like, that there are certain types of business owners that might buck the trend there. But more often than not, they are just simply not proactive because they are embedded in their business, working on their business. And of course, finally, data and analytics do interest them, but they don't necessarily see the time. They don't necessarily see the benefit. And it is all about, what is my ROI? What's my return on investment? If I spend time looking at analytics, am I guaranteed to be in a better position? So there are some similarities and some differences when it comes to small business owners, and they share some mindsets. So we see that the people that are focused on customers, on innovation and analytics typically sit within a similar mindset. And then our people focused on competitors, risk-taking and proactiveness sit elsewhere. We found that there is no distinct shift in mindset of Queensland small business owners across the business cycle. So they don't shift outside of their mindsets as they move through that heartbeat. So as they initiate, whatever they come in as, typically they will not shift where they're sitting. Queensland small business owners exhibit several shared mindsets, and this is sort of where we see this divergent between the two groups. And when looking at the responses to the mindset characteristics, there are 6 distinct clusters of small business owners that we've been able to identify. And I guess the beauty of being able to identify them, and in fact, it's really helped me because even in my discussions now, where I'm talking to a small business owner, I can almost immediately see where they sit, and I almost can immediately see what are their drivers, and hopefully these mindsets will also help you. So we have simplified what it looks like to be in a life cycle of a small business in Queensland. And what we see is that they initiate, and of course, in that maturity phase, we see them grow, and then we see them stabilize, and then we see them grow. And then eventually, as I said, there is that exit capability. We know that based on these findings, we proposed this new simpler version of a business life cycle, which reflects the lived experience of our business owners. This is what they're telling us that they experience on a regular basis. It's not 11 stages. It's actually quite simple. They have an incredible idea. They get into it all guns blazing. They might take a few risks. They learn from that. Then they're on this process of growing. Then they think, I absolutely need to know how to plan. They stabilize. They get the itch again. They might grow in a positive way or go backwards because they make a bad decision, right? And back to stability. And we see this sort of time and time again. But what's really important is knowing and harnessing the opportunities that we see depending on where they are. And this report in its full form will hopefully give you the tools to have those conversations. So let's talk about the personas. And As I said, I found these very interesting. We were in Herberton yesterday. It was a very loud and opinionated group of people that had all sorts of problems. And there was everyone from, miners to beekeepers to farmers to retailers to construction. And almost every question that I got asked, I could almost pinpoint where they were sitting, depending on how they were describing their businesses to me. So when we look at the 6 personas, we see that there is the competitor, the person that actively takes a proactive approach rather than focusing on product and service innovation, but to control the risk and to make sure that they are the one-upping everyone. It doesn't necessarily mean a race to the bottom, but potentially that could also be an aggressive competitor that we do hear often. But it is about watching those people in the market, in the ecosystem that are doing something similar or copying or doing something a little bit better and watching what you can do. So highly focused on being a competitor. The traditionalist who focuses largely on satisfying the customer. So, changing products and services to respond to the customer's need. They'll often be able to tell you what Mary buys at what time in, what aisle of the store and what she likes and dislikes, and probably can tell you about her family, friends, everything else that's happened in Mary's life. Those are the people that will respond, but they are those traditional customer is always right kind of people. The soloist focuses on keeping their own counsel and minding their own business, believes that if they improve on their own game, the rest will follow. You know these people. They're the ones that rarely come to an event. They sit up the back of the room. They don't really want to network. They might have spoken to one person at a time, maybe in that whole time. They think, I've got this. I've absolutely got this. I'm probably unlikely to lean in for help if I've got a problem as well, unless things get really desperate. We see them a lot of the time on our assistance line, in fact. Then there is the entrepreneur that embraces the market information. These are the guys that are, in fact, engaged in the research and analytics, but they can also get really bogged down in what that data says. It doesn't mean that they're able to execute it. It means that they are definitely looking for the new silver bullet. They're looking to implement new things. On the worst scale, maybe they're implementing too many new things and they might need someone to hone them in and make sure they've got some of those business basics right. Things like their financial literacy. The risk taker is similar to the entrepreneur, but relies on a gut feeling. So that's probably worse because they're not really reacting to anything. In fact, it's just a feeling. And that feeling might come down to interactions with customers. It might come down to something they read in the Courier Mail, but they are more likely to take some of those big risks. It doesn't mean that the risk taker is any less likely to succeed in business, but you will see them making lots of different changes on a consistent basis. They'll be aiming for a whale. Sometimes that pays off though. We all know those ones. And of course, the vigilant operator is cautious, examines the market, but is absolutely unlikely to make sudden moves. Those are the people that we want to get to, but those are the people that might be in your community that have been there for a really long time, that are long-term family-owned businesses that have done it this way and that they know it's tried and tested, but they've got lots of wisdom and things that they can show our other small business owners. All of this is about taking this information and tailoring it and targeting your practices and services and support in terms of how do we get to them? How do we design all of our policies, our procedures, the actions that we take when it comes to small business owners? Maybe it's something new. It might be a new regulation. How do we get to each of those personas knowing those things, knowing that our soloist isn't going to come out? They might be online. Knowing that maybe we've got an innovator that might want to disrupt it, that doesn't quite want to do what you're telling them to do, but wants to do something a bit different. So part of this report is that we've made a number of recommendations and we're hoping that you can implement them in some of the things that you're doing as well. But it is about, as I said, tailoring resources to time-poor small business owners. This research backs up what we know. They are so busy working hard in their businesses. It's that grind, it's that grit. It is about tailor making them to those personas. It's about promoting and supporting using trusted networks, engaging with your chambers, your business associations, looking elsewhere. Often in a day and age like this, we see whole groups that have emerged online. Tradie Wives comes to mind. We know that 17.8% of our small business owners across the state are in construction. But we also know that the people doing the administration and all the work behind the business are these women that are now part of an enormous online following group that share lots of different information. So maybe it's about how do we target that industry, knowing there's a different persona that sits in the background that is actually running the business. It's about providing intuitive tools to make data accessible to those that want to understand the data, or those that should understand the data, like the risk taker, and getting to the risk taker before he makes a mistake. It's also about enabling easier access external advice as well. You know, time and time again, I guess, on our assistance line, and for anyone who's never heard us speak about this, we get quite significant volumes of businesses calling us, and the inquiries can be anything from I'm living in my car, I can't pay my tax, through to I want to raise capital, or I want a franchise, or I'm looking to scale, or do you have government grants? It is very, very broad. And what we know is that we can provide them with certain services and certainly access to external advice, but we also rely very heavily on our support crew, on people that can plug in about legal, on mentors that can plug in about restructuring advice, about all those things. Many of you are doing some of this in your hubs. You're creating these networks of mentors that can help them with these things, but never before has external advice been more important, especially where we see our small business oscillating in that heartbeat. And then also when we look at sort of that tailor making of the time poor business owners and those supports that, you know, I've already talked about, how do we make them accessible? Are they in a different language? You know, are we dynamically translating them? Have we thought about the people that don't want to download things? How do we make them available, and where are we making them available? And of course, you know, when we look at everything that they need, how do we not drown them, right? So I'm hoping that some of these tactics will be very useful to you. Please take the time to have a look at the report. But whilst we know there are some things we've assumed, we now know that there is very significant research to tell you you're right. It's about implementing what this research is saying and then getting a better outcome. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dominic. Does anyone have any questions for Dominic? Are you happy to take questions on that one? Is there any questions in the room that we have? Yes, we've got one down here. Thanks, Sharon. Yeah.
No, and it isn't. In fact, it doesn't lend itself to those things because all of them cannot escape the pressure. So it doesn't matter who they are. What might change is their interest in leaning in, or the timeline as to when they lean in to get supports. But more often than not, because they are so busy working on the business and because they are so emotionally connected to their business, that concept of you know, being vulnerable and showing people what's actually occurring remains the same across the board. Oh, good. You can yell.
At all what the split is between the personas? Are they sort of equally represented, or are potentially different communities would have different splits?
So it does. And of course, we often get asked the question about sort of what's the diversity factor in some of that research as well. It is in the big form. So it will show you the splits between what it looks like, and, you know, how much more likely you are to be a risk taker, or, you know, how you are to be a soloist, or any of those things. I also think that there is probably a correlation, and we didn't explore this, by industry as well. So if you think about your sole practitioner or your legal practice director, they are typically used to working as a soloist and they don't really rely on anyone other than maybe an administration person. But if you look at someone like, you know, a tradie that's used to contracting out and sharing the load, it is a very different business that you're looking at. Oh, yeah. Are you going to ask me about payroll tax?
I promise nothing.
Okay.
Not right now. So going to one of the recommendations as to enabling easier access through external advice, through the research, was there any like key voices that cut through better to business owners? Is it a chamber? Is it a council? Is it state government? Is it something else altogether?
It's definitely not government. So what it is, it's more likely to be a chamber. It is more likely to be a chamber probably than an industry body, just by nature of the fact that they are on the ground, because they are embedded in the community and because they're likely to see you on a more regular basis. So the familiarity is absolutely there. But I also think that in terms of cut through, when you look at external advice, all of the surveying shows that the one place they go is typically a bookkeeper or an accountant. So they're less likely to go to, say, an insurance broker or to a lawyer or to those other services that they might need unless they're really, really pushed for it. And even then, I think in the other surveying outside of this report, the place that they get a lot of their information from is actually Reddit on Google, which is a bit of a concern. So it's about facilitating those trusted networks, making them regular, making them consistent. So doing them at the same time of day, the same type of event with the same type of people to create the familiarity so that they do lean in.